Firstly, thank everyone who already spoke, and uh, especially I would like to thank all of you for coming because I never take for granted that people can be anywhere doing something else and you chose to come here, so I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. So I'm going to begin. I had some slides scrolling because I want to make sure I highlight my colleagues who are working on the LGBTQ issues with me. Primarily, we're doing it together quite often in the Association of Black Psychologists. And so I'm going to begin by giving some background on the Association of Black Psychologists before getting into the specifics about the mbongi meeting that we did that was historic. And then I will be in conversation with Adrian, which I'm very much looking forward to. So I will begin. I'm mostly going to have prepared remarks, and I may have a few additions that I'll throw in as needed, but I am going to start my timer, Audra, so that I don't go over our time. So first of all, background on the Association of Black Psychologists. I am a member of the Association of Black Psychologists, which we frequently refer to as ABPsi. So often I will say ABPsi as I'm reading, which was founded in San Francisco, California, in the United States in 1968 by Black psychologists from across the country. The association was formed in the wake of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King and the rise of Black nationalism of that era. The association was initially intended to create a psychology of Black experiences focused on improving the circumstances of Black people, as the founding psychologists believed that a psychology created mostly by white middle-class men could not adequately address the situation of people of African descent, particularly in the volatile 1960s U.S. context. A psychology was needed from a different worldview than the Eurocentric psychology that was promulgated within the dominant mainstream American Psychological Association, which had been established since 1892. Early writings in the field of Black psychology and the mission of the ABPsi were responses to significant social issues, particularly as related to the well-being of members of the Black community. And that is taken from Clark, McGee, Nobles, Weems, published in 1975. So when I say early writings in the field, I'm referring to going back to the 70s, as the field pretty much got started in 68. So by the 70s, these would be the earliest writings officially in the Journal of Black Psychology. So early scholarship that appeared in the Journal of Black Psychology responded to scientific racism and the assumptions made by psychologists who ascribed to traditional Eurocentric paradigmatic thought. As well, Clark and colleagues stated that a distinction between African-centered Black psychology and Eurocentric psychology is that African-centered Black psychology is, quote, divinely inspired, divinely guided, and hopefully divinely expressed. The Association of Black Psychologists is today still an autonomous organization of over 1,400 members. It is a safe space for Black psychologists who conduct research, teach, and provide clinical services using an Afrocentric worldview relative to traditional psychology, which centers a Eurocentric worldview. The association also recognizes the diverse historical experiences and cultural expressions within and between peoples of African ancestry. The following is the definition of Black African-centered psychology that is accepted by the Board of Directors of ABPsi as stated on the association's website. So I'm going to pause here for a moment, and before I read the definition, I'm going to ask that as I'm reading it, if you would ask yourselves if what I'm sharing in terms of the definition is what you thought the definition would be. So the definition is as follows: Black African-centered psychology as a system of thought and action examines the processes that allow for the illumination and liberation of the spirit. Relying on the principles of harmony within the universe as a natural order of existence, Black/African-centered psychology recognizes the spirit that permeates everything that is, the notion that everything in the universe is interconnected, the value that the collective is the most salient element of existence, and the idea that communal self-knowledge is actually the key to mental health. ABPsi has been increasingly welcoming of initiatives that advance the optimal functioning and inclusion of persons throughout the African diasporic Black community. I and a small group of other colleagues have highlighted, quote, LGBTQ+, and sometimes I do quotes because I'm still grappling with the string of letters, and so I say that as a way of saying sometimes I may want another word, but I'm going to say that just so that we can all be on the same page. Identities within the association. This is important because, as H. Sharif Harakuti Williams in 2016 asserted, Afrocentric scholarship within fields such as Africana studies has been dismissive, incomplete, erroneous, or negative regarding Black same-sex attractional persons and Black persons who are gender nonconforming. ABPsi now does not shun Black same-gender loving LGBTQIA+ content as evidenced by its inclusion of major relevant programming at the association's annual conference. So now we'll turn my attention to the historic 2022 mbongi meeting that has resulted in this paper that is in progress that I'm working on with my colleagues. So in summer 2022, myself and 4 other Black queer psychologists, queer being spelled Kweer, that is taken from Dr. Williams' 2016, we came together to plan and offer a historic mbongi. Mbongi is a word in the Kikongo language which means learning place. The term is used to refer to a coming together of the people to address a community concern or with the aim to problem solve in a meeting. ABPsi also describes mbongi assemblies as designed to plead a case and or to critique and clarify important social issues. Thus, the focus of our mbongi at the 53rd International ABPsi Virtual Convention was to emphasize the relevance of Black LGBTQ+ persons' cultural and historical existence within the broader African human family and within the Association of Black Psychologists. The 3 schools of thought within ACBP are 1, traditional, 2, reformist, and 3, radical. That comes from Karinga, 1993. Each of us who contributed to the historic mbongi ascribes to the radical school of thought. To be of the radical school of thought is to emphasize African philosophies and deep study of humans' cosmological, interconnected spirit selves in our approach to understanding and explaining human values, motivations, and ways of being beyond reliance on traditional Eurocentric formulation of questions and methodologies. We agreed on the following objectives for our mbongi based on our individual areas of concentration. So the first one that I will read, the first objective, comes from my specific contribution to the mbongi, and I will expand on some of the terms after reading the objectives. Participants will be able to identify at least 3 of the tasks and challenges regarding our LGBTQ plus HBCU students, HBCU meaning historically black colleges and universities, students of African descent regarding their need for sawubona, jegna matching, and kujichagulia, and I will define those terms later. Participants will be able to apply Afrocentric concepts to LGBTQIA plus elders of African descent in therapy. Participants will demonstrate an understanding of why contemporary LGBTQIA plus people of African descent should practice ancestral veneration. Participants will delineate at least 4 ways that African-centered thoughts are relevant to the healing of LGBTQIA plus people of African descent. And lastly, participants would be encouraged to review the mission of ABPsi in light of the need for outreach to LGBTQIA plus youth, adults, and elders across the African diaspora to advance LGBTQIA plus inclusion. So we had to be very specific about these objectives because the mbongi was offered at the conference for continuing education credit. And so we were aware that people who are licensed providers, they would need to have some specified takeaways from the meeting, from the mbongi. So members of ABPsi as proponents of African-centered Black psychology theory and research are inclusive of methods that arise from sociocultural and philosophical concepts, traditions, and experiences of ancient philosophies, such as Kemetic and Bantu Congo cosmologies, among others. Our approach emanates from African philosophical assumptions about human behavior, consciousness, and nature that have been documented to survive across space. The approach of psychologists in ABPsi is not a dismissal of the complexity of the cultures and peoples of the vast African continent, but rather, as Karinga stated, based on the commonalities found in general worldview across the peoples as distinct from values and beliefs of Eurocentric worldviews. As contemporary members of ABPsi, we maintain that African-centered Black psychology is useful for understanding the centrality and salience of spirit for optimal functioning for all people. Nobles, Beloyi, and Sodi in 2016 referenced Dr. Fukiao, who taught that several African languages have terms for referencing community members' violation of the sacredness of their spirit. One term studied in Black psychology is a condition called samunu. It is caused by violating ancestral traditions, taboos, and the community, and recall that the self and the community are one. So violating one's inner divine presence is what Fukiao referenced as samunu. Samunu created a condition called kizungu zangu, or tornadoes of the mind. Fukiao wrote specifically about tornado of the mind as referenced in Bantu Congo language. Black psychologists assert that anywhere on the planet, persons can manifest spirit defilement. Spirit defilement can cause tornado of the mind. The lack of wellness which harms the self and others in the human family. such as LGBTQIA plus persons of the human family. So I'm going to pause for a moment here and say, I think I would be remiss in my comments if I did not point out what many of you are probably also familiar with, that President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda is well known for having incited violence against with anti-LGBTQ plus laws. And the ABPsi did release a statement about that, which talked about Museveni being sort of influenced by neocolonialism, Christian movements, and the remainder of some of the colonial laws. And rather than necessarily acting from a place of cultural authenticity. So I wanted to point out that the association did release a statement about that, not without a lot of discussion first and making sure that it is worded in a way where it is in keeping specifically with the tenets of Black psychology, where the focus is on spirit and self-determination. So I point that out also because as I was talking about Sumunu, remember Sumunu references violating ancestral traditions, taboos, and the community. So anything that is directed at a people that causes harm to the people of the community would be considered a cultural violation or a community violation. So the family is the family. Gender from an Afrocentric worldview is not equivalent to what is taught from a Eurocentric worldview in the Afrocentric worldview. The Eurocentric worldview does not prioritize collectivism, harmony, and spirit. So we agreed on the title, Let's Talk, Reuniting Black LGBTQ plus People and African-Centered Thought, for our mbongi, because these words were anticipated to resonate as invitational rather than suggestive of expected contention. We also chose words to reflect a presupposition of inclusion and belongingness rather than a plea for such. The title also reflects the spirit of Sankofa, the tree word from the Akan tribe of Ghana. Specifically, we must return and fetch the African-centered thought that was lost or distorted, such that Black LGBTQ plus people in some spaces have been gradually disunited from being thought of as fully belonging in the African human spirit family. Within the Association of Black Psychologists, the topic of Black LGBTQIA plus family had been addressed prior to the year 2020. For example, at the 50th anniversary convention, a mbongi was held entitled To Be Healthy, LGBTQ, SGL, and Black/African, Theorizing, Defining, Healing Ourselves while Building for Eternity. Even though prior to year 2022, ABPsi accepted Black LGBTQ plus themed conference proposals, topical commentary, and openly identified members of the LGBTQ plus African family, we maintained that a need for growth and critical consciousness remained within ABPsi. We stated the recognition of need for authentic unity of our diverse family and factual, culturally congruent education for the good of the collective African family. An Adinkra symbol representing unity was included in the conference programming with our mbongi, and you all have seen it scrolling on the slideshow there. Funtun Funifu, Denkem Funifu is the name for a Ghanaian Adinkra symbol. Any conjoined beings/spirits must work together in harmony/unity for mutual survival, Thus, given the title of our mbongi, it was fitting that this Adinkra symbol was printed in the conference agenda with our mbongi title. The mbongi is an example of a setting in which Black cultural wisdom may unfold and initiate healing. Harewood 2022. Harewood 2022 described Black wisdom as being transformative, liberatory, and a healing resource. For our mbongi, each of us pulled from sources of Black wisdom to integrate with the work we do as clinicians, academics, artists, and combinations of these. Each panelist's work with Black LGBTQ plus populations incorporates contemplative practices, which Harewood described as centering strategies for decolonizing inner life. Our mbongi can thus be thought of as a kind of contemplative practice at the ABPsi convention. Through it, we expected to disrupt Eurocentric thought about Black LGBTQIA plus persons that might result in any of the 5 dynamics of oppression which Harewood listed as dehumanization, disconnection, destruction, delusion, or disempowerment. Each panelist for the mbongi focused on a different population of interest within the wider Black LGBTQIA plus family. It is our expectation that the mbongi and our developing conference paper would highlight the Black cultural wisdom inherent in the work that we do with our respective populations. Each panelist, during the development and organization of the mbongi, provided questions for the moderator to pose during the mbongi. An overview of my content and response to the scripted questions follows. Also on screen, I have showcased the beauty and the brilliance, the sacred and the divine that are my creative colleagues, accompanied by the questions that they addressed during the mbongi. So for emerging adults, HBCU students, I addressed the following questions. What are the tasks and challenges regarding these students, specifically as it relates to Jegna-ing and Kujichagulia, which I will talk about shortly, and what has been my experience of Sawubona, or ICU, Saku, or Spirit, and Ubuntu, collectivism among LGBTQ plus students in the HBCU campus context. The responses to these questions were framed referencing Wade Noble's thoughts on the fundamental task and challenge of Black psychology. This was taken from his 2013 Focal Symposium paper, in which Nobles argued that the task and challenge of Black psychology is to, quote, to defend and promote the interests and image of Africa and Africa's children through understanding the past, present, and future of our human story. Kujichagulia, Swahili, self-determination, was referenced in the mbongi as an overarching source of cultural meaning-making within the entire human African family, with a purposeful need to focus on LGBTQ plus people of African descent. In the case study of HBCU emerging adults at a public university in North Carolina, there is need for ongoing unlearning of what Kobe Kambone called cultural misorientation regarding what it means to be attached to the Eurocentric creation of labels such as straight or gay. Likewise, through understanding the past, present, and future of our human story as spirit, the Eurocentric creation of the alphabet string, such as LGBTQIA, also does not align with Kujichagulia. A critical question thus remains, who are we really? Who are we really? Another important question raised during my portion of the mbongi is who is doing the jegna-ing to advance kujichagulia for emerging adults at HBCUs when they begin to sense who they are. In the African-centered worldview and taught within ABPsi, to be a jegna is distinct from the Eurocentric term mentor. Rather, to be a jegna is to be known as one who has been tested in struggle or battle, demonstrated exceptional fearlessness, shown determination, and courageous protection of one's people, land, and culture. And that specific definition is taken from the website of Dr. Nobles. And the word jegna, that definition is being loosely translated. You all know English is sometimes, it is being loosely translated from the ancient Abyssinian or Ethiopian Empire, from the Gaze language. Okay? So the plural form of that word is jegnak. So jegnak also demonstrate diligence and dedication to their people, specifically providing development, nurturance, and defense of younger members of the community. Based upon this definition, to have a jegna is imperative within the culture of HBCUs for LGBTQ students, though unfortunately this is not yet formally embedded in the university context for the LGBTQ population. Though HBCUs have historically been places for growth and cultural identity immersion for our young people, a task and challenge for us is to intentionally focus on building an ABPsi certified group of people, such as those leading the mbongi and others, to do the jegna-ing of students entering knowledge of who they divinely are. This is such that who they manifest to be is less likely to be based on cultural others' determination and labels. This requires ongoing prompting of deep critical thought to questions such as, what motivates popular Western thought labels such as stud, femme, top, bottom, trade, soft stud? I have frequently asked these emerging adults to ponder, who are they really? Okay, all those words aside. And not to police their language, but to prompt critical thought, right? Are you simply repeating words that you are hearing, or are you deeply reflecting on where these words came from and if they really and truly apply to you? Okay? Does the use of these labels represent kujichagulia, or rather a reflection of how spirit beings are assigned based on language that is not authentically, as Marimba Ani would say, of our asili, or our cultural seed? Kujichagulia aligns with Williams's 2016 use of the term gender maroon cultures. A challenge for the emerging adult HBCU students is to be gender maroons, breaking free from limiting notions of Eurocentric labels based on gender and gender-expressive stereotypes. In the Southern U.S. cultural context, I have seen a shift slowly happening to more expansive, liberating thoughts about attractional identity and gender nonconformity, although still these thoughts are not necessarily in alignment with culturally relevant self-determination. I'm wrapping up here now, and I'm well ahead of time. I'm so good. Okay. Some emerging adults unconsciously may want human connection of their spirits, or saku. Especially post-year 2020, some have revealed that they don't feel that human connection is a priority for them. This is incongruent with the task and challenge for the human family. Sawubona, or seeing one another has reduced, as health professionals and researchers have reported on increased loneliness as a health crisis. However, some students do still appear on social media as new first-year students. They post messages that are used to seek other new LGBTQIA+ students who have also newly arrived to campus. This can be used as an inroad to enhancing unity or oneness. The task and challenge is to better assist them to overcome lack of confidence in their ability to achieve the human connection that they seek. A typical gay-straight student alliance or LGBTQIA+ center on an HBCU campus, as might exist at a historically white institution, is not necessarily the culturally congruent action for emerging adult HBCU students. Instead, initiatives that feel more family-oriented and communal, such as off-campus gatherings with communal eating, music, dance, deep dialogue in comfort, or walking together in nature to really see one another, seems to have promise. There is much work to be done to know and have a clear understanding of our human story. Same-gender loving and gender-diverse students have always existed as a part of HBCUs and of our wider African family. We must see these students. The challenge is to see or sawubona these students in need of guidance to know themselves as divine spirits, to self-determine rather than select from the string of alphabets made available from a worldview that does not prioritize purpose and the divine. A priority remains for the family to culturally see ourselves in connection throughout nonlinear times and interconnected spaces. Spirit is central and salient for identity, healing, and health in African-centered Black psychology. Lastly, in spring 2023, a student in my Black psychology course said to me that a good way to describe how she views herself and other HBCU students on campus is, quote, "We are connected strangers." According to the definition of Black psychology that I read earlier, there is some hope in the student's view. For the student to view herself as connected speaks to her awareness of extended self. This is positive. Yet, her addition of the word strangers was said as if this were stable and normative. It reflects a lack of understanding of Black psychology's assertion that, quote, communal self-knowledge is key to mental health. Herein lies a major task and challenge for emerging adults to not only feel a distant connection, but to know one another, not as strangers, but as connected divines. This could mean relinquishing concepts and thought that are well established around the world, though not culturally and spiritually congruent with communal self-knowledge and illumination and liberation of the spirit. Thank you, I am done.
Well, thank you very much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Lewis. Thank you. Can I call you Michele?
Yes.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes, Michele is fine.
Michele, thank you so much. Thank
May
you
I
so
call
much
you
for that.
Adrian?
You may.
Okay.
You may. You may.
All right.
One of the questions you asked, and that you ask, you said students, is who are we?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was an important question, and I want to begin by asking, who are you?
Me?
You. Who is Michele Lewis? Who are your people? Where are you from? Who are you?
Well, my first response was to answer the question based on kind of what I was getting at when I asked them that question. So this is not my quote, but the quote resonates with me. I am a divine spirit in a physical container having a human experience, which is what I constantly want students to start to think about when I teach Black psychology. No matter how students identify in terms of their attractionality, that's a phrase that I start my Black psychology class with. And do I always feel like I'm a divine spirit in a physical container having a human experience? No. But I think that's a part of the human experience, is to sometimes, not live up to your divinity. And then the second part to your question, well, my people are, in terms of the land where I was born and where my parents were born, is Virginia, but I feel connected to the people of the diaspora because I do believe in unity and Pan-Africanism.
Mm-hmm. I'm particularly interested in how you have come to be, because all of us, there's that idea that all of us are in the process of becoming. Mm-hmm. Right? And we've all come from somewhere. We didn't arrive here by spontaneous generation. Right?
I forgot I have a mic on.
Okay.
So sorry.
As I was saying, we didn't arrive here by spontaneous generation.
Mm-hmm.
We have history. We've had a journey. So I guess the second question that I have is, how did Michele Lewis come to psychology? What was your journey to here?
So Michele Lewis journeyed to Eurocentric psychology first, because that's what you are exposed to in any curriculum, no matter even if you're attending a historically Black university. And I always take it back to the 70s and being a teenager. And when I first learned about the Jim Jones massacre in Guyana, and I saw the cover of a magazine in which the bodies were just there.
Can you just remind people, because we're of a certain vintage, perhaps. Not everyone has the same understanding of what that massacre was.
I like how you did that, Adrian.
Can you remind people?
Okay, so yes, this would have been 1978, I believe. Yeah. Oh, whew. And there was a largely African-American group of people living, I believe, in the San Francisco area of the United States. And they were influenced by this very charismatic guy by the name of Jim Jones. And he was a leader of a cult. And they followed him to Guyana, and he was their leader, and these were people who were disenfranchised. I think it's very important to point that out. Looking for hope, believing in someone who had a tremendous amount of social influence over them, and so they all did end up in Guyana, and there was a mass suicide where they drank, I forgot what they all consumed, like a cyanide.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when I saw that as about I was a teenager. I think it was about 13. Yeah. And I saw that, and I did not know what suicide was. Because I grew up in small town USA, and remember, as he just said, the era of not having internet and phone, but I did have encyclopedias, and so I went to my encyclopedia and I looked it up. And
that's a book. if for some, some of you might not.
And I read it, but I still didn't really quite understand. So I was very fortunate that my parents were willing to invest in a 22-volume set of books called Understanding Human Behavior if I promised that I would read them. And that's kind of how I got to that.
You read the whole thing?
I read every volume because they sent one a month. So it would come, and then another one, and then another one.
And what did you learn during that process?
Well, I learned that understanding human behavior was not just about these atrocities that brought me to it, but everyday, ordinary human beings just wanting to understand ourselves better. It wasn't about, for me, and I never, even when I decided I was going to study psychology, I never did intend to go into clinical or, pathology. The Jim Jones thing intrigued me because even that wasn't a clinical condition. That was something that any human being could succumb to under certain circumstances. Social influence. We all, succumb to social influence. So what I learned was just that psychology was pretty broad, and things I had not even thought about yet, I started to think about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you enter the university, you're studying this discipline, psychology. Mm-hmm. What are you looking for? What were you pursuing? What were the questions you were trying to answer?
What's interesting? Even the quote I started with, divinity, physical, having a human experience. I was looking for the human experience, like trying to understand human beings. Because even though I am from a small town in Virginia, I don't think I was ever small-minded. I wanted to know a lot because my mom made us get library cards and do book reports in the summertime.
So, she was that kind of mom.
Yeah, that was important to her.
I know those kind of moms.
That was important. Yeah, it was important to her. And so I was always intellectually curious. So I think that's what I was looking for, this human experience. Like, how can I understand it?
So that's what you're looking for. You're studying...
Without knowing that's
right.
what I was looking for. But
right.
upon your question, yeah.
Yeah, so you're studying psychology
mm-hmm.
in university.
Mm-hmm.
Psychology from a Eurocentric, or rather a psychology with a Eurocentric foundation, shall we say. What did that give you, and what didn't it give you?
The Eurocentric?
Mm-hmm. In terms of your formation?
Well, when I was an undergraduate, I think like many of you, I didn't really realize that there should be more to psychology than this. I was just learning the theory, going through the motions, taking the tests, But by the time I graduated and I had decided I wanted to go to Howard University, I was specifically interested in, still not Black psychology yet, because I still didn't quite know what that was, but I took a class called biological psychology. That's how I got interested in the brain. And so much of it was based on animal studies. Now remember, I'm looking for the human experience. Animals are okay. But I was trying to understand, okay, the animal studies I get it. And I had to go to lab and do the lab rat stuff. But that did not really feed me in the way that I wanted to, because really I realize now, Adrian, that I was looking for narrative And when you are studying, doing the animal research, you can get results that you can generalize to humans, but you're not going to get a narrative because the animals can't talk to you. So I'm looking for narrative, and this is why I think when I did find the non-Eurocentric psychology, I felt like it was just such a good fit, because therein lies the narrative and getting into the storytelling and really being able to understand more about that human experience.
You know, I'm of a certain age now where I can reflect on the last 35 years. And when I think about how I came to journalism, you know, I came to journalism because I was part of a group that felt that we were being lied to, right? That felt that when we were often looking at the newspapers or looking at television, that we were being told stories that we knew were not true, right? We knew that they were distortions.
Fake news.
And we were committed to changing the story, to changing the frame, and to being in a position where we could be subjects of history, not objects, where we could be in control and telling our story in our way, and reflecting the reality that we thought was important for the entire society to see.
Absolutely.
I want you to talk a little bit about, first of all, the harm that you feel the conventional approach to psychology might have been causing and has caused, and the effect that it had on you, on your own mind, and your own process of decolonization, of decolonizing your own mind.
Well, some of you here may have heard, may have been exposed to, I don't know if there are any psychology students here, but there's an acronym called WEIRD. Somebody said, WEIRD. And again, I'm blanking on the theorist who came up with this, but WEIRD stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And that's what the majority of the psychological research is. It's based on those groups, those populations. So as a person who's like social justice minded, I think any field where that's where the majority of your knowledge is coming from, the WEIRD categories, then if it can't be said that you're doing harm, then at least it can be said that you're not being thorough. You're missing doing work that's relevant to a wide variety of people. And like I said, I didn't really realize that until later, when certain theories that I had learned still were being presented only in a way that was kind of historic, but not dealing with the contemporary day-to-day human experience of people in their neighborhoods and in their communities. Because if I'm going to read repeatedly about salivating dogs who learn, to drool to the sound of a bell, classical conditioning is pervasive and we've all been exposed to it. But how does this relate to people in communities who are also being classically conditioned with buying lotto tickets, going to liquor stores, smoking cigarettes, things that it's on the billboards all around you in your neighborhood, and it's not in all neighborhoods. And so there's a conditioning that is happening that seems very far removed from the salivating dog, because the way it's presented in the textbook, it's not presented in relationship to things like poverty and social influence, disparities, and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. In your presentation, you talked about that student who described herself, I believe, as a connected stranger.
Yes.
And you said that the terminology that you would want her to become a connected divine. Right? You know, I'm curious as to how emerging LGBTQIA+ adults, you know, how can they become connected family? And what kind of psychology, what kind of, you know, Black psychology do they need in order to become that family?
So I touched on that a little bit as I was talking about, you know, on a very basic level, starting with questioning the labels and repeating words because they are popular in the world, or popular in the English language, or, you know, popular in your peer group. And, you know, and it's the same thing with other terminology that people use without thinking. The N-word, for example. You know, I push that as well to people, like, think deeply about what that means, you know, in terms of the consciousness you're evoking by repeating words that a cultural other implanted into your brain. And even if you say, you know, you flipped it, or you're coming up with new words, or, you know, the alphabet keeps growing, you know, it's still, I think it's still important to pause and think about, who are you really? And one thing that is required, I think, is spending time in meditation and reflection, study. There's so much, I'm constantly studying, because to live up to your divinity, you have to be intentional about it. It can't be something you say you say out of your mouth, but you're not constantly, like, working on it. And we talk about this a lot, and I'm saying we as in all of us, the distraction we all have with our media, our phone, our technology. And so I have said to students, you know, try one day when you come to campus to just walk to your destination without your earbuds in or without your headphones on. Just try it, you know, and see if you can pay attention to how many different birds you hear. Try to see if, as somebody's walking, if you can make eye contact with them and just nod your head. You know, you don't even have to say hi. And I think those are the kinds of things that help us, all of us, irrespective of our age, connect better with one another. But it's harder, I think, today than it used to be.
Mm-hmm. You know, you were saying the importance of questioning some of the terminology that is used. And you talked about how this lexicon that we operate from can cause us harm, perhaps. What are some things that what are some things that you're most concerned about when you think about the kind of the state of emerging
Black LGBTQIA plus people, what most concerns you about their current state? And it's a big question, because there are many different jurisdictions that we're talking about. The African diaspora is vast, right? But you have that kind of bird's eye view. What are some things that most concern you about the state that you think young LGBTQIA people are kind of in right now?
The self-determination, the spending time intergenerationally, and for all young people, irrespective of how they identify on the attraction and gender spectrum, the lack of human connection, because they talk about that a lot. It's something they share, and often it's from the standpoint of just not really knowing how to do it, which is another generational phenomenon that we were less, I think, confused about how you connect with another human being. That's not instinctive for them.
How are they being treated within the Black community, within their own communities? I read an article recently that talked about Morehouse College and talked about how the conception of Black masculinity has been, or the kind of conventional notion of what it means to be a Black man on the Morehouse campus is being challenged, right? That there are, it seems as if there's more space to be gender diverse within the Morehouse College, which is a historically Black college. It's the college, of course, of Martin Luther King Jr., the college of the Black bourgeoisie, really, in the United States. So it seems as if there's more space today for folks in that institution than there was maybe 15, 20 years ago. But when we look at kind of the general Black community, are you seeing changes in the way in which these institutions are engaging with?
So, there's so much diversity, as you know, in Black communities, right? So I can't make like a general statement about the community in general. But one thing that I do still support is the commentary that we should discuss the topic not so much so from Black communities being less accepting, as opposed to maybe more vocal sometimes about saying things, but then also I think acceptance could look different in different communities. Whereas I think in mainstream culture, you would hear things like, don't ask, don't tell, right? At one time. And a kind of don't ask, don't tell was common in some contexts, in black contexts. To your point, I think younger people are less willing to shrink themselves.
I was going to ask, is heteronormativity as pervasive in some of these Black institutions that you're familiar with today as it was a generation ago?
I'm going to say yes and no, right? Because There might still be, for folks who may not be familiar, there are rituals and traditions in the HBCU, right? Or especially around homecoming time. And if you're going to be on the homecoming court, for example, it is genuinely expected that if, you are a female presenting person, you're expected to dress a particular way on the court. And so over time, there have been some, controversies around that for students who are gender nonconforming. But, we also have male-presenting, male-identified students who may want to be a part of a dance team or a cheerleader, and they may...
Sorority?
I haven't seen that yet at my institute.
The
Miakas.
I was thinking about the Miakas.
See, he's bringing up. Are they still men interested in AKA? Is what that stands for. But I'm familiar with that from quite some time ago.
Okay.
I didn't know if they still do that or not. But I know that, if you're a talented dancer, you're a talented cheerleader. I have seen, male students at different HBCUs who participate in those groups, and I feel like they seem to be allowed to be themselves. Now, as far as going, to the visibility of maybe wearing this exact same attire that the female-identified students wear, perhaps not. But again, I can't speak for all. I'm just talking about my institution.
One thing I know that you have, I'm going to, one last question. You've talked about the importance of emotional emancipation circles, and that this is something that you have I suppose, pioneered. Can you just talk a little bit about that and what emotional emancipation circles have to offer?
Okay, so I would like to change it from pioneer to I advocate for it, because it's an association development with a group called the Community Healing Network. I support it because it's a safe space for you to have kind of like a semi-structured experience where you can talk about and unpack some things that have happened that you may not have ever really talked about around race and racism. And I'm now trying to do it targeting LGBTQIA Black people, because I think originally it's just a broad, anybody who identifies as a person of African descent, it's for you. But like I did something specifically for women challenged by poverty, like now I want to do with this group. Not to separate people, but just so that we can have targeted experiences to speak to people's various human experiences.
How do they work, just briefly? Like what's
there's themes, there's 7 themes, and so you can set it up where you do 1 theme a week, or you can do a 2-hour session where you shorten everything. You can do 2 days, as long as you hit upon the 7 themes and that everybody gets to go through the experience of the themes. And you have certain rituals that you have to do, and people are bringing their human experience and music and movement and poetry and photography, proverbs, quotes from ancestors, quotes from elders, all of that's in there. It's a soulfulness experience.
Well, thank you for giving us a soulfulness experience today.
Thank you, Adrian.
Sharing your story, Michele. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Just going to ask if folks have questions and comments, please. There's going to be an opportunity to pose the questions. Yes, right here. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I noticed that you avoided using words like recovery or treatment and opted to talk more about healing. And I was hoping if you could speak briefly to what healing means to you.
Okay, thank you for picking up on that because Black psychology is more of a positive psychology, trying to pull on, draw on people's strengths. And although there are people in Black psychology who are clinicians and they have to, you know, treat and deal with recovery. So healing is, you know, it's transformative. It's transformative and it requires inner work and drawing on, as you heard me say, wisdom. I spend a lot of time reading from, you know, ancestors, and I love spending time with my elders. I like spending time in nature, and all of these are things that can contribute to healing. I mean, of course, if someone has a diagnostic condition, you know, those things I would suggest should be added to whatever is the main treatment you're getting from a provider.
Other questions?
Thank you, Dr. Mans. Dr. Lewis, can you tell us what you have learned through your research in terms of the concept of a shared oppression amongst the two groups you focused on, the LGBTQIA+ and the reuniting that experience? And Mr. Harewood, thank you. I would like to also share that Hampton University and Spelman College for Women and Howard University are the colleges that many of the Black USA affluent will focus on if they do not select to go to some of the Ivy League institutions. Thank you so much.
So the question was, what did I learn from the work? Or what am I continuously learning from the work? You know, I would say, and I hope you won't regard this as a cop-out answer, how much I don't know. Like, I have to keep reading because every time I come across a new theorist, because I am very much so an interdisciplinary thinker. So if you're an interdisciplinary thinker, you're going to constantly run across stuff you don't know because there's people you've not read, you've not heard of. And one of the slides that I had up here with Dr. Williams with the Afrocentric decolonized queer theory, Dr. Williams is not a psychologist. He's I think he calls himself a sexologist. His concentration is in Black sexuality, and so when I first started reading his work, it's very dense, but it's very good. And as a matter of fact, one of the FIST graduate students has asked me for the paper, and I told her it's dense, and she was like, I'm gonna read it. So I'm gonna share that with her, and so I like to keep reading because there's more stuff I learned that I don't know because I'm committed to remaining interdisciplinary. So I guess I would say that. Does that answer your question?
You have another question here?
Thank you so much for this very thrilling conversation. I have learned quite a bit. And I'm really fascinated by this interdisciplinarity. And listening to you, I began to think about ways, I'm just, really getting into this decolonizing psychology, and I find this very fascinating, especially in line with the turn to decoloniality, which is pretty much the areas that a lot of scholars are talking about regards to dealing with colonization and decolonizing. So one area that seemed to me to have been silent in the conversation, or rather as you spoke about this decolonizing psychology, is the idea of indigenous knowledge systems and, alternative medicine and alternative healing. I am not very familiar with your work, but I'm just wondering if there are ways in your work that implicate these ideas, especially with indigenous peoples, ancestral Africans, and diasporic Africans that deal with alternative medicine and alternative healing, and how this is also tied to indigenous knowledge systems of our ancestors. Thank you.
Yeah, so also, thank you for that question. I focused on the mbongi that we did at the 2022, that focused on the LGBTQIA. There was also a very well-attended session at that same meeting about alternative medicines and alternative healing practices, indigenous knowledge systems, ways of knowing, cultural meaning making. That was very well attended. So I think that Black psychology is a space for that to be, I think, given more of a platform in psychology. However, I will share that most people, when they are training in psychology, you are going to know the Eurocentric, you're going to join the APA. It's just standard, as it is, I think, in most disciplines. You have like a flagship association that you're expected to join. And then, though, we have to do more things like this to get the word out that there is another psychology that doesn't get the same attention. And oftentimes in the HBCU context where I work, the students are looking for the kinds of topics that you raise because they want to go back to their communities and work with people in their communities. And they know they have to learn, the statistics of how you reject the null hypothesis and the t-tests and the ANOVAs. They know they have to learn that because that's the mainstream psychology. But they are very much so interested in narrative and some of the things they heard from elders about alternative practices for healing, that they don't have all the pieces, but they've heard things from their grandmother or their great-grandmother, their great-great-grandmother. And so it is a place where they could start to study and learn and be accepted.
Can I just ask like a quick question? Like Black psychology emerged out of the African American experience. What kind of reach does it have beyond the United States, and what kind of connections would it have in Africa and the Caribbean?
So it developed there, but as I was sharing, the philosophy and the knowledge systems are more non-Western and Pan-Africanist.
So what kind of connections would it have, or what kind of, how rooted would it be, right, in the context of continental Africa in the contemporary moment?
So I think that here again, this is where we differ from the mainstream psychologists, because in the Afrocentric worldview, we're thinking that this knowledge system survives across time and space, but you must study. And you cannot be afraid to be exposed to things that might seem quite foreign to you. And you have to be prepared that if you're going to do this type of work, you're not going to necessarily be considered a mainstream psychologist. Mm-hmm. Like, trust me, like I was surprised that I got picked for the Fulbright because I'm thinking they probably don't even know what I'm talking about, you know. So this is so. But I love that I have this opportunity to talk about this field and how it differs from mainstream psychology and the things we can continue to do with it if people are willing to step outside the box, think outside the box. You know, don't be afraid to learn African languages because you're going to have to go into this area. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to study. And, yep.
Thank you, Michele, for the presentation.
Thank you.
The question that I'm going to ask connects to what just asked to you. Excuse me. This issue of rootedness, blackness in Africanness, when we are using colonial languages, how that had happened, because you find that even the terminologies that you have been talking about, sometimes you can't help it. We continue using them.
Absolutely.
Some of the terminologies that you are using, like mbongi, kujijangulia, whatever, yes, I could recognize them because we still use them, for example, in Congo, in Tanzania, in so many other countries.
Yeah.
But then you find that there's a disconnect, or the meaning disappears whenever we change them into either English or French. So then that element of rootedness, I think, is still very, very important. Two, how do you help, especially young people, to exist, and to assert their agency in colonial spaces?
It's risky. It's risky, but I'm going to take it back to connection, human connection. There's strength in numbers. And the more you embrace that communal self-knowledge is the key to mental health. This is why when he asked me what am I most concerned about, my answer was the disconnect. People, young people not feeling connected to one another. Because it is risky to assert your agency as a marginalized person. But the unity and the connection, I think, helps. And so the degree to which we can help students learn how to connect, I think is a start.
Hi, thank you, Michele. This was really wonderful, and I just wanted to comment on how you used healing as a central piece. And I think in many Black, but if I speak in the context of Africa, healing is an everyday thing, and it's not also separated from community and home. So I wonder in your research if that is something, because you don't wait to heal until something is wrong.
Yeah.
And so for me, ritual is important. Community connection is important, how you do that. So living in Canada now, as part of the big diaspora, my focus is how do I teach my son what that means? Because a lot of it, 6 a.m. every day, I'm doing incense like my grandmother, but it's not, my son sees it, is around it, but translating it without the connection of that piece is some of the community we talk about. So I think I would like you to comment maybe healing as an everyday practice rather than.
Yeah, it's like the question that she asked about how, I wasn't talking about like recovery and all of those things because we're really talking about day to day what you must do to be grounded and centered. And, Ikram, the thing that I can say is, and I don't have any children, so I'm venturing into territory where you might say, I think you have to start with the rituals and the traditions very, very early so that it is just so ingrained and so like normative that it just becomes like a way of life, you know. And I don't know how old is your son, but you know, that would be my suggestion to anybody who has young, you know, very young children, that you know that the rituals and the traditions and the things have to be normalized and consistent, yeah, and communal. Mm-hmm.
We can take one more question if anybody has a question.
Thanks so much. I can get a sense of how deep and close and intimate the work you do is, and very embedded in community. But I was wondering if you could speak a little to the broader political landscape, which is really bleak, I think, in the States right now, between the various attacks on especially trans folks that are resulting in horrible legislation, the attacks on critical race theory and those who are interested in it. My question is, how much do those kinds of battles matter with the people that you're talking to, and what forms of resilience and resistance are they maybe developing or applying to address those things, if they are?
Well, I wish I could give you like a answer, because I know that in the work that I do, we don't really go so much into talking about the broader socio-political, although because that is embedded in us, right? These EECs are an opportunity for any types of harm that's been done to be expressed in that space.
Emotional emancipation service,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah.
Because what you're talking about is real. It's real, and that is one of the reasons why I was saying earlier I wanted to try to do a project that is an EEC for this particular population, because the kinds of things that in their human experience they are contending with is likely to be different than if it was just a group of Black folks in an EEC together. Everybody experiencing the socio-political mess, right, that is going on. But the human experience is very different if you're trans or, you know. So I think we create a space for anything to come out, or for people to bring in something that they want to share that, to what you were saying, Crum, helps them to do their day-to-day healing.
And what do you tell those folks, those young people who despair, and they who say, who feel that they have no hope and they have no agency?
Yeah, I've unfortunately met said students across my career. One thing that I was involved in for quite some time was trying to figure out how to offer spaces, because remember, as I was saying in the talk, to just set up a gay straight student alliance or an LGBTQIA center on campus, that oftentimes may not be enough, because again, it's a different cultural need. It goes back to the community all the time. And so I still say, even for the folks who despair, we have to help them connect. They're trying, but it's not always successful. And so I think if you're in despair and you're alone, that's disastrous. So I try to get people connected, folks I think they might get along with, or try to suggest these walks. And even with my Black psychology class, like, we had to do a walk in nature as a class. Now, some of them at first, they didn't like it because they're thinking, oh, this is far. But, plus the class was at 8 o'clock in the morning. So, but when they wrote about the people they had a chance to talk to, because it naturally created a space for them to not only reflect on their emotions, but also walking, I noticed people started to talk, before we got back. So I just try, Adrian, to get them connected, as best as I can. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think I can speak on behalf of the group here in thanking you for making us feel more connected this afternoon. Thanks so much, Dr. Lewis. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And let me just, on behalf of everybody here, thank you both for allowing us to bear witness to such a very intriguing conversation. This is no doubt the first Black History Month event that everybody has attended for February 1st, so you've set the tone and helped orient our minds for the rest of the month and hopefully beyond. So thank you both.